Hi, I'm Bob Conte. I'm the historian here at the Greenbrier. Oh, wait, pause. Wait a minute. I used to be the historian here at the Greenbrier. I got to get used to revising that. I guess I'm the retired historian at the Greenbrier. Maybe I'm the Greenbrier historian emeritus, whatever. But I've been at this for 43 years, and the board of the Historical Society, of which I've been a member for 15 years, asked me to talk a little bit about my career here and the history of the Greenbrier. And it seemed like the best place to start, the obvious place to start, is at the beginning. At least the beginning of the Greenbrier, which is right here at the famous, I'd even say the iconic Spring House, which is where the story of the Greenbrier begins, because the reason people start coming up here is they come up to take the waters, drink or bathe the sulfur water to restore their health. And the first time we can document somebody doing that is in 1778. But that's why we use the phrase, the Greenbrier's been in operation since 1778. So 1778, 200 years later, 1978, I show up looking for a job. And in the course of introductions, I meet Bill Pitt, who was the general manager at the time. And Bill Pitt, who of course, in hindsight is a genius, he comes up with the idea that he's well aware that in one of the wings of the Greenbrier, in the attic of one of the wings, there's a bunch of old stuff that's been accumulating for years. He looks at my resume, graduate work and PhD from Case Western Reserve, worked in historical societies and archives. Maybe this guy will go up in that attic and sort things out. And that's really how this whole story began, my job here, to organize the archives. And I'm such a good archivist, or professional pack rat, that I have the original letter here. This is the letter in the original envelope of my hiring from Bill Pitt to me, saying, confirm the arrangements that we have discussed. Job started on June 16th, 1978. I will inventory their historical collections. I will do this at a rate of $4.50 an hour. I will work 8 hours a day. I will dress appropriately. This agreement will continue on a week-to-week basis, and if for any reason we should consider terminating the project, you would be giving at least 2 weeks notice. Well, years later we laughed about it. Well, week to week turned into year to year, because when I started looking through all this material, I realized, first of all, there's this incredible history to this place. And also, I also realized that if I organize this stuff too quickly, I would work myself out of a job. And I'm looking around, man, if you got to go to work every day, why don't we go to work at a place like this? A beautiful setting, a historic setting that has good food and great golf. So the whole idea was to drag this out as long as possible. And so pretty soon I started giving tours. I started working with the public relations department. And then week to week turned into year to year, which turned into decade to decade. So I say we're standing in front of the Spring House, because that's where it all starts. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention maybe the most memorable thing that happened in my 43-year career here. I was married here on July 1st, 1989, standing right here. Betsy was married too. Yes, we both got married on the same day. So certainly when people ask me what's the most memorable event for me in my long relationship with the Greenbrier, I was meeting Betsy, right? So she took a job here as director of social activities. We were between marriages, as they say, and pretty quickly we realized, hey, we think this thing can work here. So it's 32 years later. When I talk about my career here, very much in partnership with Betsy for all those years. We worked together on lots and lots of projects. She retired earlier this year, and I guess now we are on to the next chapter in our lives. So as I say, the story begins at the Spring House and with the spring itself, and then the resort develops as cottages. So back before the Civil War, the resort consisted only of cottages. There wasn't any big hotel, and one of those cottages today is the President's Cottage Museum. And that's one of the things that fell under the scope of this position as historian at the Greenbrier. So let's take a look inside. So we're inside the President's Cottage Museum. And one of the main reasons I want to bring up here is sort of to make the point that the Greenbrier has been conscious of its own history for a very long time. This museum has been a museum for almost 90 years now. It opened as a museum in August of 1932, and the murals you see behind me were painted at that point. So an artist named William Grauer did these paintings showing kind of what a typical summer afternoon back in the 19th century, when this was the great summer southern social resort. And so really history has very much been a component of how we're perceived, how we present ourselves. I remember telling Bill Pitt when he hired me, you can buy great real estate, you can build a great hotel, and you can spend a lot of money and get a great staff, but you can't buy history, and we've got it. And that's one of the things that distinguishes the Greenbrier from lots of other places. And one of the reasons I had that job as maintaining the archives for the Greenbrier is once you get it put together a museum, they started collecting material here back in the late 20s and early 1930s, and a lot of that has remained here for years and years. Incidentally, speaking of the Historical Society, during the Second World War, when the Army took over the Greenbrier and used it as a hospital, these murals that we're looking at behind me were actually taken down. They were moved to the old library building there in Lewisburg. This was before the Historical Society was created. This is in the 1940s. And they were there for probably 15 years. And then after the war, they were brought back and reinstalled here. So really the best objects and artifacts in our historical collection, our archives, I display here in the President's Cottage Museum. So we're upstairs now, I think by far the most popular room here in the museum, which is open to the public. I mean, certainly if you want to come by, our hours right now are 12:30 to 5. They're sort of flexible. You may want to call ahead. But the museum is open to the public. And as I said, by far the most popular room is up here. We have all I call the famous people picture rooms. And which reminds me, for the last, 4 years now, I've been doing a Facebook page. So if you're into Facebook and you're kind of interested in old historical photos, which I guess I should assume, speaking of members of the Historical Society, just go to Facebook and put in the Greenbrier History Group. So if you put in there the Greenbrier in the search box, the Greenbrier History Group, God, I put hundreds of photos up. As I say, I've been doing this for 4 years. And if you're a golf fan, the Greenbrier Golf Group is strictly on the history of golf. So the Greenbrier History Group, the Greenbrier Golf Group on Facebook will give you access to really the creme de la creme of the collection. We have this large collection. Like most historical collections, 10% of the items are used 90% of the time, and those are primarily the photographs. So take a look. In some ways, there are two histories of the Greenbrier. There's this whole 19th century history, the spring house, the cottages. There was a hotel here before the Greenbrier. This plaque commemorates the old hotel, the old white that's come and gone, was torn down 100 years ago. And then the railroad across the street, the old C&O, today's CSX, buys the property in 1910, and really a whole new era begins. They build the Greenbrier. They bring in golf and tennis. The old white course opens in 1914. And sometimes I think of that 19th century history as almost the invisible history. Today people say, they know the Greenbrier's old. It goes back to 1913. But even in 1913, there had been a resort here for 100 years before that. So the railroad actually purchased this property in 1910. As I say, they built the Greenbrier, bought in golf and tennis, and then they owned it for 99 years, from 1910 to 2009, with one exception, the Second World War. And, in many ways, some of the most interesting part of the Greenbrier history is when it was used as an internment center for enemy alien diplomats, when they brought German, Japanese, and Italian diplomats here right at the beginning of the Second World War. The Greenbrier was kind of a temporary housing location while the State Department worked out an exchange to get them back to their home countries in exchange for American diplomats stranded overseas. And then it becomes an Army hospital. And in many ways, for 4 years, this was Ashford General Hospital. And sort of emotionally, I've always felt sort of attached to that whole story. My father was at an Army hospital for many months during the Second World War. And really one of the great privileges here in my 43 years was meeting a lot of those soldiers coming back. And, it was always sort of a bittersweet experience for them. They had good memories. I mean, in most cases, they left here in better condition than they arrived, right? But still, it was a hospital, and it was certainly a reminder of the ravages of war. And I guess I probably have met the last World War II patient here, but I've had lots and lots of discussions and talked with these former soldiers or people who worked here or local folks. So for 4 years, this was an Army hospital. I was up at the National Archives years ago, and I came across this number: 24,148 soldiers were admitted and treated here in those 4 years. And this was owned by the government. The railroad sold this to the Army. Army sold it back after the war, and then that's when Dorothy Draper enters the story. Now, if you ask people on the staff what I do around here or what I did around here, they would say, well, he gives tours. And that's really been one of the highlights of my career here. I never stopped liking giving tours, telling the story. People seem to be very interested in the history of this place. And then the whole conversion, lots of questions about the Dorothy Draper interior decor. It's pretty amazing. She arrived here in late 1946. There's been a 75-year relationship between the Dorothy Draper Company and the Greenbrier, with Dorothy Draper for the first 20 years and Carlton for the last, Carlton Barney for the last 55 years, you know. It's really sort of unprecedented, a relationship that goes on that long. So I spent many a day talking about this room, the Victorian writing room, which really is the quintessential Dorothy Draper room. And then, of course, the other big story is the bunker. And you know, to some degree, I have this funny sort of ambivalence about the bunker. People say, oh, the Greenbrier is a historic place. It has this Cold War bunker. And I like to say, well, stop, wait a minute. This was historic long before the bunker was ever dreamed up. Certainly, it's a great story. It's an amazing story, but I don't want it to overshadow the rest of the story. And again, one of my memorable moments there was being interviewed by Ted Gupp from the Washington Post, who wrote that article, you know. And I remember back then I was as curious as anybody else. I was never cleared on the project, but you know, I'd heard all the rumors. And when he came to interview me, it was very clear that he knew way more about this than I do. My first impulse was, hey, tell me the story. And then I realized, wait a minute, you know, he's got his Washington Post hat on, I've got my Greenbrier hat on. And so I, of course, denied there's no bunker here. And of course, he didn't believe I was a word I said. And that's really interesting, because once the bunker is unveiled and open to the public there, it sort of it explains a lot of things over the years. And certainly the biggest reaction I had, and I think most of my fellow employees, was that the bunker was for Congress, how big the bunker was, and really how elaborate the plan was to move not just a couple of people, but 1,000 people down here. And it's amazing. Here it is 25 years later, the tours are going gangbusters. When we first started these tours, we thought, we got a couple of years here and interest will wane. Nowadays, that's sort of, I think that brings in lots and lots of guests. They've seen so many media productions about the bunker. And then, of course, the other great story is the sale, when CSX sells this to Mr. Justice. And, you know, those were grim days there in the first quarter of 2009. It looked like the Greenbrier was not going to survive. And, you know, here I'm the historian. I've seen this resort survive wars and depressions and wild swings in American social habits and customs. And there were certainly moments there in the first quarter of 2009 that it looked like we were simply just going to close. And so that was a euphoric moment when Mr. Justice buys the property. You know, a man with deep pockets and a big heart and a long connection to the Greenbrier. Certainly nothing that you would have found with a chain operation. And so I look at these last 12 years under Mr. Justice, a good stewardship, all the money that's come in, the improvements to the Greenbrier. You know, it's a bittersweet moment when you retire, and Betsy and I retire at the same time. You know, sometimes I think we enlarge our sense of our importance here, like the Greenbrier is going to fall apart. But I've seen lots of people retire. You know, one of the amazing things about the Greenbrier is simply the longevity. It's been in business for so long, and I have a sneaky feeling it's going to continue on without Betsy and me in just fine condition. Well, thank you for watching.